Crossy Road is a chill game where a chicken tries to cross the road. But what if it was a psychological horror game? Well, in this video, I completely transformed the game to be first person, have better graphics, and be absolutely terrifying. So the first thing on my list was to get a prototype for the road and cars. My strategy for the ground was to make these little tiles that spawned in as you play, and this made sure that the road was different every time. Then I added a car that drove along the road and would reset you if it hit you. And yes, I know my car is a rectangle, but this is just a prototype. To add more cars, I wrote some simple code to spawn them at random times. And this is an okay start, but it looks like trash and it isn't scary at all. So the next step was to upgrade the graphics. I started with the ground and tried to give it a realistic snow texture. I'm pretty horrible at art like this, but I think it turned out okay. And trust me, it looks so much better in the finished product. With the ground textures in place, I wanted to add safe spaces in between the roads where cars couldn't drive. But for some reason, I just could not do it. The safe spaces wouldn't spawn in the right spot, or they would overlap with a road, meaning cars thought they could just drive over it. After hours of trying, I realized my idea of randomly spawning tiles wasn't working, and I was gonna have to come up with something new if I wanted this game to work. My new idea was to make a couple presets for the road made up of 30 or more tiles, and these would spawn in as you play instead of one tile at a time. The new strategy for spawning the road was better for performance, but it was also so much easier to work with. Soon enough, I had made all my progress back, and adding safe spaces in the road was pretty easy, so I could get started on the next step. Adding cars. I downloaded a free van model to replace the rectangle I called a car, and it looks horrible. Okay, the first problem is the vans are just spawning from thin air, so I made an area for them to come from and some fog blocking it, which helped it look more realistic. But the van itself still looked pretty awkward. I spent a long time messing with the lighting and animating the wheels to make the car look better, but after a while I decided the car can't look bad if you can't see anything. So I made the level pitch black. Okay, this was clearly too dark, but instead of making everything brighter, I gave the player a flashlight. This made the cars less awkward, but it also gave a way scarier feel to the whole thing. But another problem, there's only one type of car. I fixed this by adding 3 types of trucks, 2 cars, and another van. I just had to write some simple code to randomly decide which one to spawn in, and everything was much more immersive now. But the game was still missing a big piece, and that was, you had no motivation to keep running. In Crossy Road, if you're still for too long, you get eaten by a bird. So the next step for me was to add something like that. I decided to add an axe murderer named Guy who would chase you around and make sure you keep moving. I got this model and he looked like a really nice guy, which is not what I was going for. So I gave him a mask and an axe to make him scarier. He had a run animation built into him, so I just had to add the axe and helmet to it, and now we have an axe murderer. I also wanted the game to have a mini cutscene at the beginning instead of just spawning you in the middle of nowhere. So that was the next step for me. I took this hallway and had the idea that the enemy would chase you to this door until you hit it open and start running. After some simple animating and adding a couple sounds, the cutscene and enemy were done. The next thing I wanted to work on was decoration, because right now the starting area is a little bland. I decorated it with trees, rocks, and fog, and this made a huge difference in making the game feel scary. I liked the trees and rocks so much that I decided to spawn them whenever there was a break in the road, and this helped the game feel more full, but it also added difficulty. I thought this was good progress, but then I realized the enemy guy wasn't actually following you.
Gatorade.
He would chase you in the cutscene, but then he would just stand there. So back to step 4. I couldn't actually animate this guy because I had downloaded him pre-made, so my solution was to add a jump scare when he killed you, where he gets right up in your face and makes a loud sound. This ended up being a lot harder than I thought. Sometimes he would float, sometimes I would fly away, sometimes he would fly away, sometimes the camera would spin around and look at nothing, sometimes this happened, but my favorite bug was when this happened. After a lot of trial and error and a little ear damage, the jump scare turned out okay, all things considered. Finally, I could move on to the last step. Finishing touches. This meant a couple small things like the speed of the player in the cars, editing sounds, and performance enhancements like making the roads you've already crossed disappear. But with that, the game was complete. And here's how it turned out. It's clearly inspired by Crossy Road, but it's unique enough to be its own thing. And it marks 1 month of game development for me, so I think it's pretty solid. If you want to see my first game, click here and subscribe to follow my journey.